I know I'm wearing a similar outfit to yesterday. Sorry about that. Um, I did change my t-shirt. I know I have the same bandana on. Um, I more or less, I wear my jeans a couple few days in a row. As to whether or not I changed my underwear and socks this morning from yesterday, um, I'm going to say I don't know if that's necessarily a relevant topic. And if it is a relevant topic, it might not be a relevant fact. So, worked more on this today. The Mr. Chicken Butterfly. Um, I did the thing I was talking about yesterday. And there were a couple ways that I did it. It's my object, which is just a triangle. And if you rotate it 90 degrees, while rotating its wings 180 degrees, I thought it would do a certain thing. But I just realized today there's this curve of the sphere I hadn't recognized. And I did this in two different ways, neither one of which matched up with this drawing, which is what I thought it was going to do, which reveals a logical error. But I did learn something, because as these things turn the way I've envisioned them to turn, I didn't take into account the way these, the most logical way I can say it is the way these bisections intersect, these plane bisections, and how that turns, as this mechanism is turning, the sphere also turns in order for it to do what I want it to do. So this, in a sense, this, what I call an egg, is quote unquote rational as I made it, which I thought represented what this shape is doing. As it turns out, I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure I'm wrong. Because if I turn this object clockwise, or rather, if I turn this object counterclockwise, I'm sorry. Okay, so the flaps move counterclockwise. So if I move this object clockwise and move these objects counterclockwise, if I'm looking down on the object, right? So if my horizontal plane is my xy plane, then my xy plane, if this was a three-dimensional object, which it is, that I turn, if I turn it clockwise while these are bending counterclockwise, my xy plane, whereas this is my z plane, looking down, my xy plane, if I bend and turn in different directions, I get this image. So it's like kind of straightish, a little bit vesica-ish, and then like something happens and it just goes boom. Whereas if I rotate this counterclockwise while spinning these flaps counterclockwise, then I get this shape, which is it's more closely related to what I expected, but it's not the picture I thought it was, which I still like. But it looks more like this. So it's a little bit yin-yang-y, but it's also a little bit of an ellipse. It's almost like if, and maybe they did, but it's almost like a Mayan yin-yang. Because there's this, definitely a circularity, a cyclicity to it, kind of. But there's this blockiness or this rounded squareness to it also. Trying to make it so it can be seen. And it's also like kind of no, it's a little bit like a yin yang, but it has that little bit extra. It's not a 1.5 yin yang. It's not a 2/3 yin yang. But it's kind of elliptical, but it's also not perfectly circular. And again, what's so interesting to me about this, and especially like in this image, in the first scenario I described, where it's rotating clockwise, where it's rotating clockwise and it's bending counterclockwise, between the fit, and I have it separated into 12 frames because the entire circle separated into 48, so the 90-degree turn is 12 frames, just 12 frames, but between 5 and 9, like between 5 and 9, so that's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, that's 5, even though 9 minus 5 is 4, the fifth to the 9th frame is 5 frames, 5 out of 12, fifth, they're all right there together. In this little clump. So if you were to watch this object spin and spin, or like spin and turn, like almost half of the frames would be just a little dot inside of a sphere, because it would still be, all of these points would be touching the sphere, all of them. So in some sense you're tracing out a path of a sphere, but in this very particular, it's like boom, digga 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 boom, or more like boom, boom, almost like a lightning step leader. Does almost the exact same thing, at least in the lightning that goes from the sky to the ground. It's different from the ground to the sky, but if I remember correctly, from the sky to the ground, it's like and that's kind of like what this is doing, because it's shooting down real fast. It's going like, now it's exact, though the way I have it isn't exact, because this isn't exact, and the way I constructed it isn't exact, especially at this scale. If this was 10 times bigger, it would be way more accurate, or precise, or whatever, or both. But there's a couple things. One is I'm mostly wrong. like I've said before. But the other, I guess, moral of this story is that the simplest object in the world, performing, separated most simply, performing two of the most simple operations on it. So you have a simple operation, like simplest operation, on top of the simplest operation, on top of the simplest operation. So you have three of the simplest operations, function, not a function, but kind of like what we think of a function or a formula dynamically, right? And dynamism is inherent. There's no such thing as what it. See, that's crazy. There's not even a term. Indynamic, undynamic, static, which isn't static. Uh, Numbers. But the slightest, the briefest, 3 steps into the cave, or 3 steps out of the cave. In that plus or minus 3 of the threshold of the cave. It's already like, what? And this has been a lot of work for me. But also the other point of this, and it won't be very clear except for people who like know this shit inside and out, which are the people of the future who in 1,000 years will be watching this and maybe just realizing that they have to come back in time and save me. Kind of, so to speak. Sorry. But I assume it would be fucked up if your collective displeasure with the situation equaled mine. That's how I feel about it. Though that might not be. There may not be like a congruency or a harmony. In that assessment, it might be skewed by the ocular nature of my emotionalism. But what I was going to talk about was fight fire with fire, and the other thing is an extension of people are real. And I keep having to remind myself what I mean by people are real. People are real. Man, I'm having a hard time with this one today. I'm remembering the fight fire with fire okay, but the people are real thing I'm having a hard time remembering. Right. Okay. Yeah, I know. So I'll start with the second thing. People are real, because I just remembered it for a second. I'll get it. Yeah, the people in my life, I used to have a lot of friends. I used to be really social. I used to interact with community a lot. And I don't now. At all. Pretty much, except for work and who I associate with in work. Several years back, part of my rationale for that was because I'm in the vicinity of people every day. But yet I ward myself off to be close with certain people. And that became problematic about 6 or 7 years ago, when I realized I didn't have the social technology, so to speak, the wisdom to interact with everybody as if I were interacting with them most closely. For that matter, those I'm most closely associated with. I didn't necessarily feel like I was really exhibiting the capacity of like a deep connection. And what else matters, right? And I was beginning to really more existentially feel those questions of, if I strive to achieve that with one person, why not all people? How am I mistaking the way in which I I try to put everything onto one person in the wrong way, in the wrong context, you know. So I guess that began the process. And then, well, I guess that brought me to a place where I saw something I'd not seen before, and now I can never unsee it. Which I've been pointing at, but I can't exactly say, though I've said a lot. And stuff I've been kind of afraid to say, but at this point, not. I used to be afraid to say things because of what would happen to me. Uh, Now I know there's one of two things that is going to happen to me, and I wouldn't say that gives me like the comfort or the peace to do what I do, but it gives me enough comfort and enough peace and enough fuck it that I do what I do. People are real. Since then, my whole object is like everybody, everything, but I can only speak to as much of what like I know or think, and I can only do that in a certain way. So if I completely withdraw from everybody I know and love in the world, my rationale has been, well, I'll make videos and maybe no one will watch them for 100, 200, 300 years, maybe longer. And just trust that, you know, I've been trying to tell myself, like, just trust that whatever's happening inside of me that propels me to do this, despite my many, 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 many faults, that for some reason I'm like getting this signal. Between neutrinos and anti-electrons or positrons or whatever, like somewhere in that mix, what is it, W neutrinos or quarks or ups or downs, or I don't know nothing about nothing, but I'm trying to learn. But somewhere in that mix, something's coming backwards saying, do this shit, And we don't realize that, because like sometimes it's often talked about within a lot of circles how like intention or prayer, you pray for something and something comes to you, or you want something and something comes to you, or you intend something and something comes to you, right? But it comes to you in the future from your prayer or your wish or your want or your intention or just some kind of synchronicity. Something comes to you, but it comes to you from the past. For instance, people talk about finding the right book or the right movie or the this or that or the that, right? So, like, something happens, you have a problem, you have a crisis, so then you have a prayer, you have a want, you have an intent, which will be answered or is answered in the future, but often, most often, from something that came in the past. When we are relating with objects. When we're relating with people, it's a little bit different because it's a chain of past consequences that meet at a moment. It's a little different. It's two pasts meeting, or several, or four pasts meeting. Two person. If it's an interaction with one person, then it's two personal pasts that pre-exceeded the prayers answered. But when it's just an object, it's still kind of the same thing, but then you're interacting with the object and the way in which you find the object. But that still relates back to a person. Now, that person had an inspiration to create this object, this artifact, this piece of this song, this book, this movie, something that you're some media, something you're looking for that gives you some joy. This happens without artifacts, of course, in like the fucking real world. You know, when a dog senses, because people talk about how like dogs can sense seizures, but dogs also sense way more than that. And sometimes when like there are some nice dogs, like old soul, suffering dogs, kind dogs. You ever notice that some kind dogs, when they're not just being kind and happy, they look like they're suffering? It's like Buddhist dogs, so to speak. It's like Christian dogs. I know there's a problem between Christian and Buddhism, blah, 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 so on and so forth. But for people who don't know those differences, it's just the representation of like compassion. And that's what we need. And that suffering is their compassion. Some dogs are happy and nice because they're happy and nice. Other dogs are happy and nice because when they see themselves, they might look sad, then they come to you and then they're happy. When they see that you're happy. And that's the difference. The dogs who are happy all the time, that's one kind of dog. They don't necessarily give two fucks if you're happy or not. They're just happy. There are other dogs who are good dogs and they're chill as fuck. But they're happy. They come to you meekly, with humility. And when they see that they've made you happy, they're happy. And they come to you mostly when you are sad, because they are sad. Because you are sad because you're compassionate. You are sad because you care. You are sad because you're a good person and you're hurting for the bad things you've done and you're beating yourself up for being a wicked, awful, evil, bad person. Whether because you stole a hot ball when you were 5, and you can take it all the way to any extreme you want. Obviously, I'm speaking autobiographically. And as it turns out, if you're that type of person who can see that much, then you're that sad dog. I'm that sad dog. I'm having a hard time seeing how I've ever done good for anybody in my whole life. People have said things, but when I look back upon it, I just look at the bad that I've done and that I've experienced and that I've been a part of, and that I've received also, but and I look at the good that other people do and the supposed good that I've done, and I just think, no. And so much of that fear is like, it's this stubborn absolutism of wanting everything to be perfect, which makes me ruin everything. But at the same time, what if my rejecting everything is actually, what if that's a tool, or what if I can leverage it as a tool for the type of life that could be, that isn't? In a world where there are man-eating squid, hammerhead sharks, lions, cobras, pythons, all of which essentially would make a quick meal of me. How do I reconcile that? Never mind the vast expanse of the universe, the incomprehensible inner space of the microscopic, and then the holographic, hypersaturated, polymorphic nature of the cosmos. People are real. I had this post-it note for years. It was a pink piece of paper that said "People are real," and it had like a stick figure of me in it, me, and then it had a stick figure of like a person with a block in their head, which is impossible. There aren't people with blocks in their head. You could do it in a cartoon, but people are real. So you can't have that. Real situations, real consequences, real life, real love, real blood, real meat, real bone, real spirit, real soul. And if I don't see that every time I see another person, human being, soul, I'm failing. Period. That's how deep. Oh, well, yeah, but everybody's like that. Exactly. I mean, not everybody is, but pretty much. That's how bad the problem is. It used to be worse, though. You're having a hard time believing that, maybe. But you really got to think. If you're having a hard time with it, you really got to think. And once you break through, you'll see it, man. Life at different scales is fucking vicious, But there are winners. Kinda. but we shouldn't think of it like winners. Even though that's true too. People are real. I see. I forgot again. I even forgot what I already talked about after I clarified. People are real. What was the other one? Fight fire with fire. Because people talk about that, but I was thinking about it today. The way opposing ideas come together, and especially the truth and the lie, they're not the same thing. They're not a dialectic. Like the difference between like the Hegelian dialectic of the, and not that, I don't even know why they call it Hegelian. I guess he must have reinterpreted or reestablished the dialectic. Like, I don't know what makes it specially his, so maybe I don't understand it at all. But the whole deal with the synthesis, the antithesis, hypothesis, synthesis, hypothesis, antithesis, synthesis deal. Like, basically you have an idea, you find its opposite, where its opposite is true. You bash them together until you resolve them both in a new idea, which is the new thesis, antithesis. So, but that's not like thesis, antithesis is not the same thing, and I think that's where a lot of the problem is. Same with good and bad. Like thesis, antithesis is not the same thing as true and false. The truth and the lie don't have the same weight. But it's a 51-49 deal right now. And that's not great. But it's great enough where it's certainly not hopeless. There's a lot of hope. But we got to get past hope. And that's where I'm at, I guess. I have a lot of hope. Faith is something else, man. I've talked about it before, but it's worth repeating. That people always talk about faith, don't you have faith, or the infidels, the unfaithful, who will burn in hell, right? If you're not, that's the thing, man. People have, because that's the whole thing, fidelity, faith. Semper Fi, always faithful, faith. Faith. But the gift of faith, and I guess I'm not trying to, I guess I am trying to, I'm being combative in the way I'm talking, and I'll try not to be. But there needs to be sufficient pushback on this whole faith deal because of how important faith is. And one of the crisis, people talk about the crisis of faith, and they've or at least I should say, they've hit the tip of the iceberg. The deep crisis of faith is that the gift of faith, and that what faith isn't belief, and faith isn't knowing, and faith isn't just blah 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 on a pedestal, talking about, so often faith is associated with Jesus, which well, it should be in the right way, which it pretty much never is, except for, I won't even say rarely, like ultra rarely, super rarely, hyper rarely, rare to rare, in the same way that rare is to relevant. But anyway, and I'm not saying that I have it down, it's just I know from experience. And I'm only being that way because I don't hear it said, and it needs to be said. And I'm not talking to people who talk about it. I'm talking to you who have heard people talk about it and have never heard anyone talk about it in the way it needs to be. So I'm talking not even to you. I'm talking to that part of you that's wrong. What do I mean by that? I mean, if you're hearing me, if you know what I'm talking about, you're if you know what I'm talking about, you're either in a state right now or you know the state, maybe well, maybe not well. Where you hate yourself for the littlest things, or little in comparison to what we see, but like even further down from what we aspire to, right? There's no cure for suicide, but it's a pattern. There's a physics of suicide. There's a dynamism, there's a psychology. It's an epidemic. And it's the absolute worst. Well, murder also. But people are real. You are real. Lost my train of thought. Fight fire with fire. People are real. I keep forgetting the people are real part. I'll talk about the fight fire with fire part since I'm well in now. Yeah, see, time went real fast today. I thought it was more like 10 minutes. Now it's 38. Yesterday I thought I was more like 38 and it was 10 minutes. The fight fire with fire part is a whole Promethean deal. But I was thinking about like when people burn shit to the ground and the different protests that happen around the country over the last year. What a year. Weird year, and weird on top of weird, and weird inside of weird, and like weird outside of weird, and like weird on the weird, and like disreputably, unbelievably weird, on top of weird, which is still really weird, and it kind of even makes it a little more weird than weird. That's been this year. In the general media landscape, and in my own life, weirder than that. Despite nothing ever happening, except for the entire nature of my reality shifting dramatically. So I thought of the fires of revolution, the fires of revolutions of the ages, right? Burning shit down, chaos, forest fires, burning the cities down. But then I thought of escaping that. And of course, there's the good, healthy fire when we think of the noble savage, so to speak, however you define that. And it ranges a full spectrum, or at least a spectrum. There's that kind of fire too, which is a little more wholesome and magical and mystical. That's not where most of us are at, even though the mystic is not absent anywhere. So it can be found in horrible places, and unfortunately, that's mostly where it's been found throughout history. And it's also worth noting that the mystical, there is the mystery, but there are mysteries. The mystery of mysteries is the truth. Unfortunately, there are heritages of a mystery among the mysteries, subordinate and in some cases outside of the mystery, but not always. Anyway. And that also includes the more romantically, the romantic or the Philadelphian idea. That wasn't necessarily how it was either. But anyway, I was thinking of getting away from the chaos of the burning cities and the burning forests and the torched earths. That's one kind of fire. The other kind, well, I said there's this other kind of the savage, the noble savage, however you interpret that. Everybody has one. Everybody has one. Some people have a lot. Some people are it. Not me. Not yet. Maybe someday, or maybe never. But then there's the person who sneaks away on that cold winter night. Away from the chaos, away from the burning fire. And away from the fire, and away from the activity and the excitement and the passion and the heat of the moment. It's cold. It gets cold. Lonely. So going from the of this fire to the, you know, of that fire, right? Going from one to the other. And I think that's a good metaphor for where I'm at in my life and for where what I see of the world, which is mediated deeply by the screen, though I do take in a lot of sources. So I'm hoping to fill out that picture in a kind of way so that I can figure out where I am in this sphere. But yeah, I think that's a good metaphor, is that in some sense, the noble savage fire is a little bit out of range. And if we're trying to go from the chaos fire to the noble savage fire, or the noble ancestor, which might be a better way of invigorating the shape I'm trying to speak about, even though that's not quite right either. I have issues with quote unquote ancestor worship. There are many intelligent thought forms, and they can outsmart you in their representations to you. Let's put it that way. Are there ghosts? Do people see ghosts? Let's say they do. You don't always know what you're seeing, which is an unfortunate fact. You're seeing something real, yes, but you don't know always. If a maleficent thought form with greater resolution in space-time than you have has usurped your senses with an image real as shit, but not of the same soul. A facsimile that ain't who you think it is, and it's from a bad place. There can be facsimiles from a good place, and there can also be the other things. But just worth noting. But anyway, where I think we are in the world is more in the range of people talk about how there's not enough, right? The whole money, finances, COVID, automation, blah, blah, blah. There's too much work. One of the reasons why there's been a population explosion is because there's too much work. There's too much work. People think there's too many resources or whatever, population, this, that, whatever. But like, there's too much work. People are too fucking desperate. People pretty much people want to hump because they're stressed out. Everybody's stressed out on this hamster wheel that can't stop moving. But now we're in a time and place, whether it's somewhere between now as I'm talking and the next 300 years, like now we're in a place where we can kind of pull back a bit. People need to do things to stay active and to contribute, but we need to shift what we think of work, because now it's so much involved in commodities and this and that and engineered obsolescence. And everybody knows of engineered obsolescence, right? But what people don't recognize is that in the higher echelons, now, a lot of people are familiar with the idea that in the higher echelons, there's this like greed associated with the whole deal to keep people buying stuff. Oh, so you can get more of my money. But what people don't recognize is that above that idea, above those people, above that concept, is the idea of like, it's not to give the CEOs or just the company the money. Most money, people don't realize this. People never, this doesn't come up a lot. Most money goes to people, to workers, like, to the whole gig. Like, yes, it's crazy disproportionate what CEOs make, but where does that money all really go? If you watched this flow, right? If you could create, you know how they have the meteorological weather patterns, and we're always looking at the 2 day, the 3 day, the 4 day, the 5 day, the yesterday movement. But if you watched that over 1,000 years, and instead you were showing money flow, where do things actually move? Do you think there's not some underground bunker above ground, way up in the sky, of some good dude? The best mathematicians are the best people. Who's not working this shit all out, making sure that to the best of their ability, at a godlike number thing, everybody's getting theirs, you know? The system's trying like fucking hell, like heck, like heaven, to be good. The system's trying to be good. But there's a lot of bad shit. And it's the accumulated error of all our bad shit, which is really doing the most harm, or at the very least, holding back the most good. Not many things can be moral. And because that interacts the entire feedback loop between here and eternity, because it goes forwards and backwards in time, because of quantum entanglement, because of the probabilistic wave of the whatever, the electron or the quark or this, that, whatever particles, we can't tell where they're going to be or how they're going to be, but they're here or there, and then because of quantum entanglement, all that kind of shit. Which is woo-woo, but there's no unified theory, man. So, as strange as we know things are stranger. But yeah, now's the time, I think, to kind of pull back, to getting away from the crazy, not going to the ancestors, maybe not going to the ayahuasca, maybe for some people, you know. But I think for most of us, it's like, step back, dial it down a notch. Because the first rule is do no harm. And for those who have to work, I guess one way of looking at it would be just kind of a weird way of looking at it, is like, those who have to work, work. And those who have to stay home, like, just get over it. Stay home, but do something. Like, for yourself, for your soul, for your neighbor, whatever. Just something that means something, period. And share. And that's what I'm trying to do, but I could also, I'm often very afraid that I'm just deluding myself with whatever this project is I'm doing, but the one good thing about it from my standpoint is that it's keeping me above ground. And I mean that very, very sincerely. This is my work right now. It's ugly, it's messy, it's disgusting in a lot of ways. yet I see the beauty in it. And that's my reminder to stay here. And that's my reminder to keep going. And when I say my decision to stay here, it's not like a daily thing or this or that. I guess what I'm saying is that things have happened to me, and I'm sure people would ascribe one, physical this or that, whatever, one biochemical this or that, whatever thing or another. And there's truth to that insofar as the way that I don't necessarily take care of myself. But the essence of it all, at the end of it all, is that there is a spiritual problem. And if I don't fix it spiritually, which means perfectly reconcile a physical, mental, dynamic shape, kind of beneath the surface, or beneath the surface of appearance, if I don't reconcile this thing perfectly without violating, or as perfectly as possible as an individual without violating any other individual's free will, or without violating the collective free will that includes the soul of souls, God, then